Today, we're going to look at a sacred text, but not for its meaning. We're looking at its math. We're going to strip it down to pure data, to hunt for hidden patterns, all of which seem to point to one specific number, 114.
But that begs the bigger question, doesn't it? Can a text, especially one as ancient and profound as the Quran, actually have an underlying mathematical architecture? Can we find real order just by treating it as a dataset? Well, that's exactly what we're here to explore.
Here's how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll lay out the strict ground rules for our analysis. Then, we'll zero in on the single word and letter that will be our starting point. After that, we get to the core of it all. 3 different calculations that all seem to point to the same number. And finally, we'll step back and talk about what this could all mean.
All right, so first things first, if you're going to analyze a text purely by the numbers, you absolutely need a clear, rigorous set of rules. This isn't about subjective interpretation, this is about objective measurement.
So what does that actually mean? It means we're doing what's called a numerical analysis. And the key rule here is that we only use objective, measurable data points that we can pull directly from the text itself, nothing from the outside. The data has to come from the book and the book alone.
And these data points, they're actually pretty simple things. We're talking about stuff you can literally count. Which chapter is it in? What's the word's position? How many times does a certain letter appear? These are the basic building blocks for everything we're about to do.
Now, what we're not using is just as important. This method strictly, and I mean strictly, avoids any kind of external coding system. So there are no abjad or gematria values. Those are ancient systems where letters are given numerical values. The analysis relies only on counting what is physically there in the text.
And all of this really boils down to the core principle of this whole approach, which comes from the source material itself. The Quran is understood by the Quran. In other words, the text is its own reference, its own dictionary. Everything we need is supposed to be right there inside it.
Okay, so we've got our ground rules. Now, let's find our starting point. The entire analysis we're about to walk through hinges on one single letter in one single word, right near the beginning of the text.
And here it is, our first key data point. If you literally count every single letter from the very first word of the Quran, when you get to the 114th letter, it's the Arabic letter mim. This is our objective, verifiable anchor in the text.
So where exactly is this 114th letter? Well, it happens to be the very last letter of the 24th word of the Quran, which is alayhim. And that gives us our key anchor points. The 114th letter is in the 24th word. Now you're going to want to remember those two numbers, 114 and 24, because they're about to become really important. All right, now we get to the real heart of this analysis. We're going to run through 3 completely separate calculations. Each one starts from a different angle related to that 24th word, and we're just going to see where the numbers take us.
So, for our first calculation, we're going to zoom in on the properties of this 24th word, alayhim. First off, its position in the Quran is, 24. Next, for every letter in that word, we count how many times it has appeared so far in the text, and when you add all those counts up, you get 50. Then, the word's first letter is the 14th of its kind to show up, and the last letter is the 18th of its kind. And finally, its location. It's in verse 7 of chapter 1. Remember, these are all just hard, verifiable facts from the text.
Okay, so what happens if we just add these properties together? We take 24 for the word position, plus 50 for the letter occurrences, plus 14 and 18 for the first and last letter positions, and finally plus 7 for the verse and 1 for the chapter.
And the total is 114. So let's just pause on that for a second. The sum of all these different properties of the word that contains the 114th letter adds up to 114. That's a pretty interesting loop, right? But hey, it's just one calculation. Let's try a totally different approach.
Okay, for calculation number 2, let's forget about the properties of that one specific word for a moment. Instead, let's look at a whole group of words. We're going to look at every word from the beginning of the Quran up to our 24th word that also ends with the letter mim. This gives us a totally new set of data. It turns out there are 6 words like that. They're spread across 5 different verses, and they contain 31 letters in total. And if you sum up the occurrence counts for just those final meme letters, you get 54.
All right, so let's add up this new batch of properties. We've got 6 total words plus 5 distinct ones, 31 total letters plus 13 distinct ones, 5 verses, and that sum of meme occurrences, which was 54.
And just to be clear, these numbers have nothing to do with the ones we used in the first calculation. It's a completely separate data set.
And what do we get? Once again, it's exactly 114. So now we have two totally different methods, using two totally different sets of data from the text, and they both land on the very same number. Let's do one more, just to see if this pattern holds up.
For our third and final calculation, we're going to come at this from yet another angle. The very first word of the Quran is bism, which is made up of the letters B, S, and M. So, what if we go back to our 24-word section and find every single word that contains any of those three letters? When we do that, we find 15 such words. These words are made of 75 letters total, with 16 unique letters, and they're found across 7 verses in that first chapter.
Okay, so for the last time, let's add up this third, totally independent set of numbers. We've got 15 plus 75 plus 16 plus 7 plus 1. What does this final calculation give us?
It's 114. Again. That's 3 times. We took 3 completely different analytical paths, each one starting from a concrete, objective anchor in the text, and each one independently led us to the number 114, which, by the way, is the total number of chapters in the Quran.
Okay, so we've seen the calculations. They all point to 114. But the big question is, so what? What does this actually mean? How are we supposed to interpret this pattern? And, we have to address the skepticism that naturally comes with this kind of thing.
So a really common critique you might hear is that we're kind of mixing apples and oranges here, right? We're adding word counts to verse counts. But the source material has a couple of interesting ways to think about this. From an engineer's perspective, if you want to understand a complex system, you have to combine different units. You add up the screws, the weight in kilos, the length of wires. It's all part of the whole. Or think about it like a biologist. They don't need to test every single strand of DNA in existence to validate a discovery. They focus on a specific, localized observation where something interesting is happening.
So, the real point here isn't about any one of these calculations being some kind of magic proof. The key observation, the thing to really focus on, is the pattern. It's the fact that the same number, 114, keeps emerging over and over from different and independent starting points that are all anchored objectively in the text.
And that leaves us with the final question, really. Are we looking at a genuine, measurable phenomenon that's actually embedded in the very structure of the text, a kind of numerical harmony? Or is this all just an incredibly elaborate, mind-bending coincidence? The data is what it is. The interpretation, well, that's up to you.